everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Regina and this video is all about planning for our spring and summer garden for 2022. So right now, as I'm recording this, it is January 31st, 2022, which means for me, it'll be time for me to start my seeds in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I'm planning to start them between February 14th and February 21st. The reason why is because I am in zone 8A, right outside of Dallas, Texas. So the grow zone, just so you know, is only one part of the story. The grow zone is more aligned to the average winter temperatures and how cold it usually gets in the summer. But what really matters when you're planning when to start your garden and start your seeds is your last average frost date. And for us here, with about 10%, we're essentially 90% likely that we will not have a frost past April 9th. And there's a 70% chance that we won't have a frost past March 30th. So for me, within that window between February 14th or February 21st to March 30th, I have about 6 weeks in there. So that's when I start my plants. Now, if you live in a colder region, a more northern climate, that's gonna be different for you. Now in this video, we're not talking all about seed starting dates, but just so you understand kind of why this time is really crucial for me. And of course, if you're starting seeds a little bit further out, maybe you're in a climate where you get frost all the way through May, then of course, you're not gonna start your seeds as early as I'll start mine, but it's still a perfect time to be planning what you're gonna grow. Because the earlier you plan, the sooner you can make sure you have all the seeds that you're gonna need, because they do run out at certain places, and the more time you'll have to get everything set up so that when it is time to start seeds and when it's time to put plants outside, everything will be ready and you'll be set up for a really successful gardening season. Whether you're new to gardening or you're just planning for the 2022 season, there are several factors to consider. In this video, we'll talk about what those factors are, how they impact what you choose to do in your garden, and I'll show you how I've applied them to my garden. So I'll show you guys what I'm planning to grow, how I plan it all out, where I'm gonna put everything, and why. So the first factor you wanna consider is, what is your goal, right? Like if you're brand new to gardening or whether you've been gardening for a while, you wanna just stop and take a minute to think, okay, what am I hoping to get out of this? Now you can have multiple goals, but what that goal is really gonna help to guide some of the decisions that you make. For instance, your goal might be to just grow as much food as you possibly can. Okay, then you're gonna plan your garden according to that. Maybe your goal is just to finally do something with your backyard space, so you wanna go for more aesthetic as well as growing some vegetables. Your goal could be something like, you have a neighbor who's always showing off all the vegetables they're growing and you wanna get in on that action. That's a great goal too. But there's lots of different goals you may have for gardening, but you do wanna have that in the back of your mind so that you can kind of set your expectations accordingly and make decisions that are gonna best support that. I know for me, my goal in the garden, one, is working in the garden. I find it to just be very relaxing. It's good exercise. It helps me to relieve some stress. So I like that aspect of it. And then two, I really like the challenge of growing food. One, just because it's really fun to do something and kind of really see the fruits of my labor. But also, I have 3 children, a husband, we're a family of 5. So growing food, the more food that we can grow, then that's gonna save us money. And that's awesome too. Not to mention, the food that you grow in your garden generally tastes way better than what you're gonna buy in the store. So we have that bonus of having very delicious and fresh food, and we get to not have to spend money on that food, aside from, the costs of gardening. So that's my main goal. It's to do something that I find enjoyable while also helping to provide some of the food that my family eats. So the next factor you wanna take into consideration is the amount of space you have available. Now, of course, if your garden is already established and you're just gonna work with what you already have, then this will be really easy for you. You've already picked it out and you're just gonna plan what you're gonna plant for this year. Great, we'll talk about that in just a minute. But if you haven't gardened yet, or if you're looking to figure out how to get more out of your space, or you're looking to add more garden, or expand your garden, then the things that you want to keep in mind are, one, to me, one of the most important things when planning where to put your garden is where you're going to get a lot of sunlight. most vegetables that you grow are gonna require 6 to 8 hours of sun a day. Now there are some plants that'll grow in shade or partial shade, but the majority of vegetables grow best with 6 to 8 hours of sun. So wherever you're planning to grow, you wanna figure out where the sun is and where it's gonna be. Now you're also in this step considering what are you gonna grow in? Now, of course, there's raised beds, and that is my primary mode of gardening. I just use my backyard, and I'll insert some images and video footage of the backyard, probably while I'm talking. But I have a regular suburban neighborhood backyard, and I use raised beds. The reason why, and you might want to consider this as well if you're building or expanding your garden, I use raised beds because our soil here is clay, and it's okay, but it's not the best for roots to be able to expand and to grow well. You'd have to really add in a lot of stuff to help to expand it and loosen it up. Whereas with a raised bed that you set on top of the ground, you can set the raised bed and you can fill it with the perfect soil medium to grow your plants. If you have poor drainage, then raised beds are also a good way to go because a lot of plants don't really want to live with wet feet. It'll cause rot, so a raised bed is a perfect way to deal with that. But there are also other ways to garden, of course. Like if you don't want to do a raised bed, of course you could dig directly into the soil, especially if you have, this is great if you have good drainage and you have really good soil. One of the reasons I really love to garden is because I would spend summers at my grandmother's in Alabama, and she had the most beautiful garden and grew some of everything. And hers was just, she just had a section of her yard that was tilled and it was a garden. Like she didn't use raised beds, she just grew into the soil. I never even saw her bring any compost or anything like that in. And everything grew and flourished. So that's definitely a way to go if you have this space and you have the soil that works for that. Now, if you're in a small space or you're somewhere where you just can't do anything permanent, like maybe you're renting or you're just not ready to do something more permanent, then of course containers are a way to go too. I use several containers in addition to my raised beds for certain things, and they work really well. 5-gallon buckets are really nice, as well as planters and grow bags. So there's lots of options there. So even if you just have a cement patio, or maybe the only place you get sun is in your driveway, then use containers and put them there. But when you're planning, you have to figure out how, either way, you got to figure out how much space you have so that you can figure out how many plants you're going to need and how much you're going to be able to grow and make some decisions there. So figuring out what you're going to grow in and how much space you have is a very critical step that you need to make really early on. So this next factor is one that you might not see on a lot of lists, but it is really important to consider, and that's how much time are you willing or able to spend gardening? The bigger the garden, the more work it's going to be, right? Like I started out with a very small garden, literally like 4 by 4 squares. That was my garden, and it didn't take nearly as much work as my garden now that I believe is like 9, raised beds. Most of them are 8 by 4, which is just, it's more weeding, it's more watering, it's more everything. So it's important to really think about the fact that a garden is work. Like there's the planting and there's the harvesting. And those, of course, are the most fun. Those are the ones we're the most motivated to do, right? Because the planting is just really exciting to get things going, and harvesting, of course. Who doesn't love harvesting? But that stuff in between, like for me, what takes the most time out in my garden is watering, because I don't have irrigation set up. One of these days I will, but I don't. So I water by hand, and I also live in Texas. So in the summer, it's 1,000,000 degrees. And it takes me about 45 minutes to water every bed thoroughly, about every other day, sometimes every 3 days. This past summer, I finally did a smart thing and used mulch, and that made a huge difference. But it still takes a lot of time. And working a full-time job like I was doing, and then coming home and taking care of the garden. Actually, I worked from home, but it felt like coming home. Leaving my office and going outside to take care of the garden was really taxing. And for some people, they just don't have that time. So it's important to think about, okay, like what's going to be, how much work am I willing to put into this? And that's really going to help you determine how big you want your garden to be, at least at first. Now, I recommend if you want to go all in and do a really big garden, then I am not one to discourage anybody, because why not, right? But if you're a little unsure, or you know you're super busy, then maybe start small with just like 1 or 2, 4x8 raised beds. And that'll help you to, and grow a few different things. So then by next year, you'll see, okay, how much work was that? Can I replicate that? Could I do a little more? And also you'll know some things. So you'll already know, okay, when I did this with peppers, that didn't work. So you'll have a few tricks up your sleeve such that you'll be a little bit more successful going in. So you'll know some things that'll save you some time and work before you get a garden that's so large. The next thing to consider is, what exactly are you gonna grow? Now this one is fun, right? Because you get to actually figure out what specific vegetables, what specific varieties you are gonna put into your garden. So to do this, of course, now if you're planting a garden, a vegetable garden, you probably already have some ideas of what you wanna grow, right? Well, to kind of narrow that down, because I usually have like a million things I wanna do, and in order to fit all of that into that space, usually end up crossing a bunch of things off the list. So here's the factors that I use when I'm trying to figure out what exactly I need to put in my garden this year. The first question to ask yourself when you're trying to figure out what exactly to grow is, what does your family like to eat or use a lot of? Don't grow a bunch of junk that nobody wants. Grow stuff that you really like to eat, because that's gonna help motivate you to also take care of the garden a little better. The next thing you wanna consider is what grows easily in your area. Now for us, in the summers, it's hot, hot, hot. So things that grow well, okra, also yard-long beans. It was my first year growing them last year. Those grew so well. When my pole beans kind of petered out because of the heat and stopped flowering, those kept going. So, and we loved them. So I'm definitely growing those this year. I grow okra every year. I don't even have to start plants for it. I just sow it directly into the ground. And last year my okra was as tall as my house. So that's something you definitely want to look at. Look at your climate, what's going to grow well, and choose vegetables and specific varieties that are going to do that. So that'll help to kind of narrow down your list as well. Another factor you want to consider when you're figuring out what to grow is what's expensive to buy. Some things are worth growing just because they cost so dang much. Like one of those things, herbs, right? Like fresh, like dried herbs aren't that bad, but like fresh herbs, if you want to get like some fresh basil or some fresh thyme, like for what you get, a few sprigs of thyme, you're paying a couple dollars. Like no ma'am. So grow it yourself. Put some seeds in a cup and then put them outside, and you can grow so many fresh herbs, and most of them are super easy to grow. So that's one of those things that now that I've started growing a ton of herbs, that I don't understand how I ever used to pay for them. So definitely grow things that are expensive to buy. Other things that I'm growing that are expensive to buy are berries. Last year I invested in like a ton of different kinds of berry bushes. I have blackberries. I just got a couple of raspberries. I have blueberries. I have mulberries. I have 2 mulberry trees. I have grapes. So things like that. Strawberries. Berries are expensive as heck. And my children, like all children in America, love berries, but berries will break you. So that's something that I'm really excited to grow, because we love them and they cost so much money to buy, as much as we would want to eat. Another factor to consider when you're figuring out what specific varieties or what vegetables you want to grow in your limited garden space, because even if you have a gigantic garden, it's almost always limited. Like you almost always can't grow every single thing you want. So another thing I use to narrow it down is what is hard to find or impossible to find in stores. So for me, one of the things that I grow because I really want it and it's hard to find are field peas. So if you're a Southerner, you probably know what these are. They're essentially in the same family as black-eyed peas or the cowpea family, but they're a specific type. So field peas or Southern peas, they grow in the South really well. They've grown in my yard for a few years. Great, but they're so freaking delicious. And I've never seen them in a grocery store fresh out here where I live. Even in the suburbs, you have to drive out to the country to get them. So my mom used to have my aunt, who lives in Alabama, go and buy some for her from the farm, get them, blanch them, freeze them, and then mail them to us. And that was a lot of work, but it's because fresh field peas, they taste totally different, way better than what you can find in the can, but we can't find them. So I decided to try to grow them in the summer of 2020, and they worked out. So now I will always grow them, and we have field peas, and I share them with my mother, who lives just a couple miles away anyway. So that's one of the things that I grow because it's really hard to find, and I really like it. Another thing I like to grow that's hard to find, or there's actually lots of things, ground cherries, which I'd never even heard of till last year, but I've never seen those in a store, and they are delicious. If you want ground cherries, you pretty much have to grow them. I have a gooseberry bush, never even tasted gooseberry, but it should give me some this year. But that's something I'm excited to try. Muscadines, I grew up actually spending summers, like I mentioned, in Alabama, and we would pick those like wild. We called them bullets, but turns out they're muscadines, and they were so good. But I've never seen them in the stores out here where I could buy them and share that with my kids. So I bought a couple of vines last year, and so I'm so excited because they should fruit this year. And my kids actually got to taste some this summer when we were driving to Florida. On our way, we stopped in Alabama and visited my great aunt, my grandmother's twin sister, and she happened to have some growing on our fence. So my kids got to taste them, and they loved them. And then another factor to consider is, what do you want your family to eat more of? Like for us, I know one thing I want my family to eat more of is, aside from all the other fresh stuff, but like leafy greens. Those are something that we need to put into our diet more because they're so beneficial. I like them in smoothies, and I also just will eat them like sauteed, but not everyone in my household eats them as much as I do. So by growing them, they're just around more, and I can put them into more dishes and things like that. So leafy greens are one of those things that I grow because I want them in our diet more. And it's a lot easier to do that when I have them growing in the yard. And then lastly, the last factor you want to take into consideration when you're figuring out exactly what to grow is what is going to be beneficial to your garden, right? You want to make room for things that are going to be helpful. So for me, flowers, last year I grew a ton of marigolds, and I grew quite a few zinnias as well. And the marigolds, of course, I did those to, one, attract pollinators, two, they have a really strong smell, and so there's some pests that they either deter or they confuse, of course, because they can't hone in on what specific plant they like the best. So having something with a strong smell is helpful for that. And then of course they just made the garden look better. And this wasn't even why I planted them, but having marigolds sprinkled throughout some of the beds just made it more aesthetically pleasing when I was out there. And I didn't even think that mattered to me, but I quite enjoyed it. The other thing you want to grow that can be beneficial to your garden are herbs. Herbs kind of do the same thing that like marigolds as far as deterring certain pests. Like the more different scents you have going on in your garden, the harder it is for pests to find what they're looking for, or to find all of what they're looking for. Like they might find one of your cabbages, but maybe they won't find all of them. So having different herbs and smells wafting around helps to keep pests from doing what they need to do. The next factor to consider when you're planning your garden is, where are you gonna grow each thing? Like, now you know, okay, the different things that you want to grow. Now you got to figure out where you're going to put it all, right? The sun is in the southern side of the sky, right here in the northern hemisphere. The closer you are to the equator, the further south you are, then the higher in the sky the sun will be. So for us in the summer, you know, the sun is in the south side of the sky, but it is quite high in the sky. So the shadows in the summer aren't going to be very large, but there will be some shading. So a general rule that you can keep in mind is to grow the tallest things on the northernmost side and the shorter things on the southernmost side, so that you're creating as little shading as possible. The other thing you want to consider when you're figuring out what to go where is beneficial partnerships, right? Like what things can kind of go well together. Like I mentioned, herbs, I just put them everywhere. But I just kind of squeeze them in wherever. So you want to think about things that will go well together. So like I have my bed with my tomatoes, my tomato and okra bed, and then my strawberries here. Well, strawberries really do need a lot of pollinators. So I'm going to make sure I put marigold and purple basil on the edge of that bed with the okra and the tomatoes. And also in a container, I'm going to use a container and put flowers in it and have that out next to that strawberry bed as well, just to make sure that I have some things that are going to bring the pollinators over there. Another thing you want to consider when you're figuring out where to put things is trellising, right? Like some things require trellising. And so if you have established trellises, of course, you're going to put the things that need to be trellised next to those. But also if you have some things that could serve as more of like a natural trellis, like if you're, you know, if you have a fence line that you're using, then of course you want to like utilize it. Sometimes we don't even think to do things like that. But if you have a fence, especially one of those like metal ones that's easy to grow things up, then use that as a trellis and plant things like pole beans or cucumbers along the fence. Another thing you want to consider when you're trying to figure out what to put where is what types of pests are attracted to what. If you have enough space where you can like separate things out such that you don't have everything that a certain pest loves all together, then definitely do that. I am not that good at that one because it's just way easier for me to have like my tomatoes in a section and my other tomatoes over here. But also my garden isn't that big, so they'll probably find it anyway. But if you do have a big enough space, and then you can separate things. Like some people will grow like a tomato plant, you know, in each bed, so that if, you know, the pest or blight or something gets to one, it may not get to all. Now, one thing I am doing and moving things around to avoid pests are squash. I have the past 2 years, I've tried to grow squash, and it's been a big fat failure. Last year, I think I got 2 yellow squash and 0 zucchini before the squash bugs or the vine borers, whatever they were. I definitely saw squash bugs, like destroyed it, and the plants died, and I was very upset. So this time, and they were in 2 different parts of my garden each year. So this time I am going to grow them in containers and just like spread the containers out, some of everywhere, and see if I can get some squash this year. Squash isn't even my favorite thing, but I just want a few of them. So I'm gonna try that, and so I'm putting them in containers for that reason. Another factor when you're figuring out what to put where is how much space something is gonna take up. Like how much does it sprawl? And I know that seems like a no-brainer, right? But not just, okay, this thing takes up a lot of space, so I need to leave a lot of space for it. But also, if you have limited space, then some things that do sprawl out or take up a ton of space, maybe those are worth growing in a container, so you're not, you know, using 8 feet of a raised bed, whereas you could just use one container and put it somewhere where it can sprawl a little more. That's what I'm doing with my tomatillos and also my ground cherries. Last year, I had one 4x8 bed devoted just to tomatillos and ground cherries, and oh my gosh, it was my first time growing either one of them. I think it was my first time even having like a fresh tomatillo or a ground cherry. And so it was really fun. They grew really big. I'm sure I'll put a photo or something over this. But this year I'm like, okay, there's some other stuff I want to grow. And so I don't want to devote a whole bed to tomatillos and ground cherries, but I still want them. So I'm going to grow those in containers. And the containers, I can just kind of find a place in my yard, because I'm putting some of my containers on my patio area, you know, to add beauty on that side of the yard. And that way I can grow them. They can take up as much space as they need, but I'm not using that full raised bed for them. So sometimes it makes sense to put things that are gonna get kind of big, but they could go in a container. Just put them in a container and save that space. So that's what I'm doing with those things. And squash gets kind of big too. And it's really annoying because it takes up so much space and then friggin' dies. So that's another reason why I'm putting it in a container, so I won't be so annoyed that that space in my garden was kind of wasted. So that's it for the things you need to consider when you're planning out your garden. But now I'm gonna show you what it looks like. I know my backyard is a mess, y'all, so don't come for me. It is winter transformation time. So this is my garden from south to north, so that you will recognize it whenever you see it on paper. So we're walking north, and then now we're looking to the west, and that's where my strawberry bed is. The rest of these beds have yet to be planted out, of course, because it's still winter. It's last year's pepper bed, which still needs to be planted out. Okay, my failed trellis over to the right, and then this bed in here where my determinate tomatoes will go. This arched cattle panel trellis, this one held up really, really well. It held 20-pound watermelons on it, very well. Over here we have my potted blueberries and also my 2 potted nectarine trees. And then heading forward, we have my little mini orchard with several different fruit trees. They're all brand new. I just got them over this fall and winter. And then also in this bed, I'm going to add some strawberries, but I already have blackberry plants and raspberry plants planted. And then potted mulberry trees, muscadine vines that I just got last year. And over here, and this one is a gooseberry in that container. And so now here is a view of the garden from north to south so that you can see the direction. So taller things on this north side, and then shorter things are going to be down there on the south side. So here is my garden plan. Well, part of it. I'll slide it to show you the rest of the whole thing. But first off, I just want to point out it's so south is over here to the right, and north is to the left, east is at the top, west is at the bottom. Why does it look like that, you might say, rather than it being north at the top? Well, it's because I built this bed thinking about how I see it when I walk out of my back door and turn toward my garden, and I'm not very good with directions. So I just built it that way and put the compass. So deal with it. All right, so if we go from south over to north, then the southmost bed here, I'm growing field peas this summer. Those don't get very tall, so they're not going to cast a shadow or anything. And remember that something you want to keep in mind when planning your garden is, shorter things to the south, since that's where the sun is, or the sun is in that direction, and tallest things to the north, so you don't have to worry about shading too much. And then on that bed around the corners, that's where I like to put things like marigolds and basil, things that I'm using to add some additional scents and also to attract pollinators. The reason why I put them on the corners is because sometimes they take up too much space in the middle, and on the corners I can kind of cram them in. So that's just why I do it. And then also things like basil, I'm also going to be harvesting throughout the summer. And the way I pack in those filled peas, like you can plant them very densely. It's too hard. It would be too hard to get to and too much of a pain. So I like having those things easily accessible on the edges. So I'll have some marigolds and some basil. And then this next bed, this is my onion bed. And after the onions finish up, last year the onions finished early June. So I'm expecting the same time frame this year. So once that happens, then I'll pull up those onions the next day. I'll be adding the peas. And the great thing about that is, of course, that peas are nitrogen fixing, and I'll definitely use a soil inoculant so that they can, rather than depleting nitrogen from the soil, they can add some. And so next year when I do my onions again, unless I have some sort of pest issue, when I do my onions again, they'll have really nice soil full of nitrogen. And of course, I'll still top it with compost, but that'll help for the soil to be even richer for them. So next up, my cool weather bed. This is where I'll have all my cabbages and kales and things like that. That's my only 5x8 bed. I do not recommend it. I do not recommend making your beds any more than 4 feet wide because it is a pain to pick this stuff right here in the middle row. So just something to keep in mind. And then if I come down here, if I go a little further west, I actually have space here because I have a pool over here. And so this bed is here. This one is going to be strawberries this year. I've actually already planted them. I pulled them off the wall. The plants that still looked really good. Pulled those off the wall and planted those out actually I just did that yesterday. And so I'm hoping they do well. We're actually getting snow tonight here in Dallas. So fingers crossed because we're going to have some really cold weather the next few days. And then in this bed, last year this was my tomatillo and ground cherry bed, and in this bed this year, I'm actually going to put my indeterminate tomatoes. And last year I single stemmed them. This year I'm going to try something a little different and maybe like double stem. The reason why is they grew great single stemmed, but by like June, they had outgrown their trellises. And I have 8-foot furring strips, but you got to think when you put them in the ground, it's probably about a foot of the strip is in the ground, so maybe 7 feet tall, and they outgrew that so fast. And so they just kind of got wild at the top because I just refused to cut them off with so much time left in the growing season. So I think I'm going to let two stems grow up the furring strip and see how that goes, so that maybe they won't grow as tall as fast and I'll get more tomatoes from my plant. This year I'm also going to do sweet corn, some high intensity planting, so essentially 4 corn stalks per square foot. I've seen it done. YouTube says it's possible, so I'm going to try it. I actually was not going to grow corn this year. I was going to put okra here, but just today I changed my mind because I just never thought it was worth it because you only get an ear or two from each plant. I grew corn once and I got a little bit of it. I just grew like 3 or 4 stalks. But I changed my mind. I was like, I want to try some corn again because we love it. And so if I can high density plant it, I'll make sure that this bed is loaded up with compost and fertilizer, so that it has all the nutrients it needs to support tomatoes and sweet corn. It's what you definitely have to do when you're planting densely is make sure you have great soil. But I'm gonna give it a try. And so we're gonna get some corn. I've already ordered my seeds. And then also around the edges, I'll grow some basil and marigolds and purple basil and more marigolds. But I might use the petite marigolds on the edges of this bed because the other ones get so big. All right, and then if I look here, these are all the containers. That's what these round ones represent. Now, this is not where all of them are going to be. I haven't exactly figured out where to go, and my spacing for like aisles in between the beds, that's not to scale. So I didn't want to just move these circles randomly around because I just don't know where they'll go. Some of them will go down here on the whole other side of the yard where like the patio is, and on the other side of the pool where it's more of a seating area, just because that'll add some greenery and stuff to that area. And then other ones I'll just move around the beds because the herbs, of course, are great to just have around everywhere. I like lots of scents wafting in the garden. Great for confusing pests, and also it just makes the garden smell really nice. So these will be moved around. I have 7 blueberry plants, and those will also be, I mean, I'll keep them together for pollination purposes, but I haven't decided exactly where to put those. Here are my 2 nectarine trees. They are staying there. They're in planters, but I cannot move them because the roots have grown down through the holes I cut in the planters all the way down to the ground. If I move them, I'll mess up their tap roots. So that is a mess I've gotten myself into that I just have to deal with for now. And then these containers I'll add, the tomatillos. I'll have 4 of those, 2 yellow squash, 4 ground cherry, 2 zucchini. Once again, I do not know where I will put them, but I just wanted them represented in my plan as I was planning out what I was going to do and how I was going to calculate it. By the way, this is Publisher that I'm using. I have it on my computer, so I figured why not. I like Publisher because it's easy to just slide things around. Of course, you can use Google. If you don't have Microsoft programs, you can use Google Slides. That probably works the best from the Google programs. It's a lot easier to work with than like Google Docs. So just keep that in mind. All right, so the next bed coming this way, if we're heading, like we said, heading north, then, because that way is south, this way is north. So here's the bed. I had peppers in it last year, and you saw when I gave you a little tour of the garden, there's still the pepper plants in there that I need to pull out. But I'm just going to grow peppers in the same place. That worked out. So yeah, I'll do 21 and also put eggplant here. And then I'm going to replace that failed trellis that you may have noticed that I used old fencing material for, and it did not hold up under the weight of the green beans. So I'm going to take that out and replace it with a cattle panel, just one, across this way, so that, and then I'm still going to grow green beans there, or yard long beans, one or the other. But I'll just put that there because it actually was an issue having an arch here because I had trellises on both sides of this bed with the tomatoes, which made it really hard to get in here. So I don't want to do that again. So that way nothing is trellised on nothing has a barrier on more than one side. So yeah, that trellis so I'll just put one cattle panel here. And so it won't be an arch. And then of course, as you see, herbs and marigolds around the beds. So that's a theme. This bed will be my Roma and Amish paste tomatoes, my determinate varieties that I'm growing. These are the ones that I'm growing mainly for sauce. Now, I do use indeterminate tomatoes in my sauce and stuff like that as well. just as I have them. So let's say I'm going to make sauce and then I just harvested a bunch of indeterminate tomatoes as well. And if I have extra ones that, we're not going to be able to eat fresh before they would go bad, then I put those in the sauce too. And I think it probably helps add different depths of flavor and stuff like that. So I do that, but these are primarily the indeterminate ones are primarily the ones we have for fresh eating, for slicing. But if I have some on hand and I don't have anything that I'm like a fresh eating purpose, because sometimes you just end up with a lot of them all at once, then I'll use them in sauce if I'm making sauce already, or I just drop them in the freezer. And then when I am ready to make sauce, then I pull those out and use them with the other tomatoes. So, pro tip, you can drop whole tomatoes in the freezer and they will do just fine. And you just pull them out whenever you need any sort of tomato for a cooking purpose. Obviously, they're no good for fresh eating after they've been frozen, but for any sort of cooking purpose, you can use them. I've even thrown frozen tomatoes, like just taken them out, let them defrost a little, and chopped them up and put them in chili as the tomatoes in chili, and they work great. All right, so here next to this bed is this is where I have that arch trellis, that one that's made out of two 8-foot cattle panels, and they're attached in the center with zip ties. I could not get a 16-foot cattle panel into my van, which is why I did two 8-foot ones, and they worked great. So that arch trellis held my watermelons and also the few cucumbers I got before the plants gave up on me. But it held big watermelons, like not it held sugar babies, right? But I also grew some big watermelons, and it held them great. You saw in my video tour, I had you saw the black stockings. I just cut up tights that I had and used those as little hammocks for the watermelons when they grew, and it worked out great. Also along, and then the other side of this bed is where I'm growing my okra. Okra for me gets very tall because we do have such a long growing season. This past year it got as tall as my house. Now the side of my house, not like the tallest part of my house, but it got as tall as the eave, so like the first story. And it produced really, really well. Okra loves this hot climate, so I'm expecting the same. I am growing fewer okra. Last year I had 48 plants. This year I'm just growing 26, so 24 here because it's 1 square foot per plant, and then one here in this square and one down here in this square, because that arch trellis only takes up like 4 feet across. So I think that'll be plenty. I still have okra in my freezer, actually plenty of it from last summer, and we haven't used it all, and we eat it regularly. So I think fewer plants will be fine. Well, that'll be enough okra. And I'd rather have the corn instead of more okra, and so would my kids. All right, so then here is that last bed, that keyhole bed. I actually made this one out of, we had our fence. My backyard actually used to end right here, just past this bed where the okra is going to be growing in. That used to be the end of my backyard, and this was side yard on the side of my house. And last year when I wanted to expand my garden, I was like, okay, I added more beds going south, but I kind of ran out of space going that way. And I decided that we could probably move the fence and enclose the side yard. And actually, most of the houses in our neighborhood, the fence is actually a lot more forward where it's almost flush with the front of the house. So we did the same thing. So it's just behind the front of our house, and that enclosed all this side yard, which before was just wasted space on the side of the house. So I'm very excited about that because now I was able to put in this bed, which is a lot more gardening space. And I built this bed out of the leftover fence materials from this part of the fence that they took down in order to build it over here. So I have all, and I still have a lot of wood left, and I think you saw that in the video as well. I'm going to use it to build a raised bed over here to put those mulberry trees in, the ones that you saw potted. I'm going to build just so that I don't have to put them directly into the soil. I want to give them a little bit better environment to grow, so I'm going to build a raised bed here, hoping they survive like this crazy freeze we're having. Fingers crossed, y'all. I'm going to cry if my trees die. But yeah, so I'll build a raised bed out of the wood there. And then there's some other ones I may build. I'm considering building a little raised bed to put these muscadine plants in and get them out of the pots they're in, but we'll see. But yeah, this is where my fruit trees are in this bed. So this area over here is mostly perennials, which I'm fine with, kind of having a little bit of separation there so that I have this soil that's not going to be disturbed a ton. But I am going to try to drop in a few basil plants, some Thai basil here along the edges. And then I'm planning to put strawberries here because I still have some more on the fence that didn't fit in the other bed. Or I'll just leave this. Well, I don't know how to leave stuff open, so maybe I won't. But if there aren't enough, I might just leave it open and have it as a place to put runners as they come off of the other plants and build it out that way rather than buying plants for it. And then along the edge, I'm going to grow some either pole beans or yard long beans because I have some extra furring strips since I'm not growing as many indeterminate tomatoes as I did last year. I'm going to use some of those furring strips that I have left over to make little teepees to grow the beans up. And so that is it. That is my full garden plan for this coming year. So lots of things are different from last year. And of course, you guys can't see that because I didn't make videos last year. But yeah, definitely making some changes and adding some things. And yeah, so I'm excited. I cannot wait until seed starting time comes and then April planting. And I'm sure you guys are like me. This time of year is just the really exciting time for gardeners. Yeah, let me zoom out a little bit so you can see the whole thing, but it's going to be too tiny to read. All right, so that is the whole plan. You see, you can't read it, but at least you can kind of get like an aerial view. So a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then this counts as 9 raised beds. Thank you for sticking around till the end of this video. Go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any of this content. And of course, that helps it get out to more people. I have lots of content planned for the rest of the winter, the spring, and the summer. And I'm really excited to share you guys my gardening journey. Hopefully there's things in here that you can learn, and I'd love to learn more about yours in the comments. So have a good one and happy gardening, y'all.